This is the first in a series of two on leadership development for sustainability. First one is adopting an enterprise leadership mindset and why it matters for sustainability. So thanks for joining us today. As always, I like to just welcome and orientate those who might not be members, which I think most of you all are here today, on our mission, which is to accelerate the integration of sustainability into your business. All that we do is in light of helping you with that integration, as well as helping build sustainability leaders. So we do that through education, through helping you measure and improve, and facilitating connection. So just given the date, I'm going to offer a reminder here that if you are a part of the Green Masters program, the date to submit for recognition is fast approaching. It's actually September 30th. So get your answers in and submitted. If you have any questions, you can reach out to myself or Krista. And this year we are actually doing our Green Masters program recognition in connection with our awards dinner at the conference. So we're trying it a little different this year, which we're excited about. So next, just a reminder that we do offer sustainability services. If there is any need that you have inside of your business, you can reach out to myself or Krista to see if we can lend you a helping hand. And then I like to remind you of upcoming events. So next Wednesday, I'm actually speaking at a CUB webinar that's on energy management for small businesses. That Friday, which is October 3rd, we're having our open Q&A session. That's with Krista and myself. That's just a time for you to ask any questions you have to us or the community around sustainability, around membership. It's a great time to just plug in and connect and learn from your peers. On October 6th, which is a Monday, we're hosting a webinar on life cycle assessments and how they drive smarter sustainability decisions. This is both product and building focused LCAs. And then on October 8th, Krista is hosting a 30-minute webinar on what is ESG and does it still matter to my business? And then the second part to this series will be on October 22nd. That leadership development webinar is focused on gaining leadership buy-in through sustainability storytelling. So you can find all of that on our events website for registration. And then, of course, I have to invite you to our conference. I'm sure you've seen some emails from us about this. It's on November 4th and 5th in La Crosse this year. We're very excited to be in La Crosse. It's just a beautiful region on the Mississippi River. This is actually a picture of the building that we'll be in, right on the river itself. So because it's a bit of a hike for many to La Crosse, we've kind of turned it into a 2-day event. So it makes your drive worthwhile. So on the 4th, there are tours of member businesses. We're hosting a Upper Midwest Energy Forum that's also with CUB's Citizens Utility Board of Wisconsin. Train is hosting a workshop on building a sustainable building. And then that evening, we'll host our awards dinner and Green Masters program recognition celebration. And then the conference is happening on the 5th. So prices go up October 4th. If you have not yet registered, we invite you to do so soon so you can take advantage of the discounted pricing. There's discounted member pricing as well as discounted public pricing. And you can find all of that on our website, which I'll drop a link in the chat in just a moment. So before I hand it over to Erin, we have to just say a huge thank you to our generous supporters. We have annual sponsors as well as a leadership council of sponsors. And so in these webinars, I like to just take a moment to thank a couple of those sponsors. And today I wanted to highlight the Universities of Wisconsin online collaboratives, the Sustainable Management Degree and Certificate programs, because Erin, our speaker today, actually is a professor in one of those classes. So that's a great program overall if you're looking to get any type of degree in sustainability. And it's just great that it's hosted in our lovely state of Wisconsin. So without further ado, I'm actually going to go ahead and stop sharing and hand it over to Erin for our content today.
Awesome. Thank you, Jesse. And hi to everybody. If I haven't met you yet, really excited that you're here today. And this is actually part of a two-part series, as Jesse was kind of alluding to, because we are working our way up to the conference in November. So know that if you're really interested in what I talk about today, and then also at our second webinar later in October, we'll be continuing this conversation on the ground in November at the conference in La Crosse, because the leadership topic is so large and there's a lot to try and pack into just a webinar or two. And it really needs time and dedication to build on these skills over time. So one, I'm really happy that you're taking time today for yourself to help develop your own leadership skills, but know that there's going to be plenty more opportunity here as the months go on to do that. All right, so and if I haven't met you before, I'm going to grab the, hopefully the, I don't know, Jesse, if you're seeing the Teams thing in the little background on my screen. If so, no? Okay. All right, great. I just want to make sure the display is clear for everybody. So as Jesse mentioned, I am an instructor with University of Wisconsin, specifically at Green Bay, but it is for the sustainable management programs. I actually am a product of that program myself. I've loved it. It's come in handy use for all the things that I'm engaged in. In my spare time, aside from my professional career, I'm involved in multiple different sustainability organizations, which you see here on screen. And not only in addition to teaching, I'm also a board member for Be Local Wisconsin, which is the organization in the state that helps with certified B Corps. So there's lots going on. And if there's anything that you have questions about and any of these organizations and you'd like to know more, feel free to reach out to me or link in with me, and I'll be more than happy to help you. And so why did we want to talk about leadership? Well, as Jesse mentioned, I teach within the University of Wisconsin program. I teach specifically the geopolitical class. So you can imagine it's been a rather adventurous last few months here in terms of geopolitics globally, but also in the United States. But sustainability is really at the crossroads of a lot of this. And when I really love the Sustainable Business Council's definition of sustainability, because when you see it, it actually means that we're talking about business growth strategy. And we'll talk a little bit about why this matters from a leadership development standpoint, but it's really about paying attention to that long-term stakeholder value and also looking at the opportunities as well as managing risks. And when we think about leadership, that is truly what leaders have to be doing day in and day out, not only for their own work, but also for the teams in which they engage. So we're going to get into this a little bit more as we go through this particular webinar, but I'll even be expanding on this more in that second webinar in October, and as well as the session that I'm hosting at the conference. And the reason why right now especially is because we know we're in a volatile state of sustainability leadership. So this is an interesting graph, and it really, I know it's a little bit hard to see maybe on screen because the numbers are a little bit small, but just know the gap that's occurring right now. So what this graph represents is the number of US public companies that have issued a sustainability report year over year. And when Russell 3000 companies were surveyed, this was part of the survey that they received, they're only filing sustainability reports for the last, better part of the year. It only about, 432 of them that reported in the research said that they were. And we know this is a little bit of an interesting graphic because not all companies are mandated to report. So that's a big thing that we actually study in geopolitics, is that not all countries have the same requirements. But because these reporting requirements were mostly voluntary for the last better, I'd say 5 years or so, we're seeing that especially within this current climate, the intent or the willingness to report is going down. But we shouldn't panic necessarily. So this is where in Sustainability Magazine, there was this really interesting comment that was made that experts are not interpreting this as a mass withdrawal from doing environmental social governance practices or having the principles of doing these things on a day in, day out basis. But really what we can look at instead is that this is just a strategic recalibration. And in leadership development, a lot of times leaders are coached on how we as individuals are contributing to our own performance, but also the performance of the team. But what we're going to see here as I talk about this, we can shift our mindsets to really understand more of the systemic recalibration that has to happen and how we're part of a larger picture to help move people along with us. And if as a group we decide we need to pull back a little bit on the reporting or something like this, it doesn't necessarily signal panic. It's more of a reset. And we'll talk a little bit about what that looks like and why the reset might be happening. So here's another thing to kind of set the table for today. This was an article from Trellis, and actually Joel McEwer, who is the founder of GreenBiz, which became Trellis, he actually authored this, which I thought was interesting because if there's kind of coming straight from the horse's mouth, it's actually for Joel McEwer because he's got his finger on the pulse for this and has for years. And the question was asked to him is corporate sustainability dying? Meaning at the executive level, from a corporate standpoint, are we dead, right? And no, not necessarily. So he's talking more about the fact that performative sustainability is dead, and per his perspective, that's okay. And the reason why he took that stance in the article is that he was talking about it more being are you just walking the walk? Or are you not talking the talk? Or how are you actually navigating these waters from a corporate sustainability stance? And so in his point, he's saying, yes, news headlines are focusing on all these setbacks, right? And we can see this across the board, not only from the federal to the state level, but when you're looking at developments, noticing how different companies are still just forging ahead, and some big companies in that as well. So that includes things like Apple, or companies like Apple and things that they're investing in. Google's doing it as well. While we might have maybe more of a visceral reaction to maybe something that those brands represent, it doesn't mean that they don't find value in it. And so what the strategy is looking at is how can you quietly embed it within business strategy, operations, and governance. And I know sometimes we hear buzzwords such as like green hushing or things like that, but it's more about understanding that in any sort of volatile business environment, sometimes it's okay to just take a pause and keep doing what you're doing, but letting this other dust kind of still kick up and still doing what you need to do when you need to get it done. And that's essentially what the gist of the article is. But from a leadership standpoint, that can feel icky to us sometimes, right? That can feel like we're not somehow, being the champion that we need to be, or that somehow someone's going to look at us and say, oh, you're not a sustainability professional if you do this. And I'm going to argue that it's actually okay, because in the long scheme of things, if we're playing the long game, it's better to keep our practices and principles intact and know that we've got a long road ahead of us, rather than get too maybe muddied in the waters of what terms are we using, how are we talking about it, how are we showing up. It's more about, let's look at the long-term effects and how can we help our fellow sustainability practitioners as well as our peers in our company feel okay about still doing some of these practices, but looking at it through the lens of, is this part of our business strategy throughout the organization? How are our operations truly finding value in this? And then what do we maybe need? Are there gaps in how we govern our practices? So we're going to get into that. And this slide, actually, this is something that Jessie uses all the time, and I told her I was going to use it. But what I love about this slide is that from the Sustainable Business Council's point of view, this is how businesses value sustainability. And what I just kind of said, you look at this slide and there's no jargon on here. There's nothing that says we're reducing emissions, we're targeting net zero, goals. None of that is in here. It's really about looking at that risk reduction. It's looking at how are we treating our employees? Like, what does the talent side of the business look like? How do we increase just visibility and reputation? Meaning, like, are we showing up for our customers? Can our customers trust us, right? And are we creating an environment for innovation? And if, in my class, for example, I really push our students to look at the fact that environmental progress happens over time, but happens because of certain innovations and advancements, right? We're not going to get everything done we need to at once, but if we try and we try again and we look at continuous improvement, that is the bedrock of innovation. And that's what actually moves the needle over time. And most importantly, and this is where I feel that a lot of leaders don't spend enough time on, it's really about enhancing the relationships that you're building with your customers and your stakeholders. And your stakeholders include your internal team. So let's get into that. So when we think about our journey of leadership, right, it looks for the most part to a lot of us, and this is probably what you've learned too as you've grown in your career, it looks pretty linear, right? Like we're all going up the ladder, or we're going on a pretty navigable path. And when you start out as an individual contributor early on in your career, you're really just worried about building skills to do something on a daily basis, right? So you're trying to get better at whatever technical thing you're managing, or maybe it's, applicable skills that you can say, yes, I got the certification in this. But as we go up the ladder, things get more gray. They also get a little more squishy, right? So managers, typically their bigger need is really just to manage other people. And people are complex, right? We don't show up every day the same way necessarily. We have stresses that come into our lives day in and day out, and things that suddenly a manager, when you're responsible for others, it can really start adding a different level of stress onto your plate that maybe you didn't have when you were just worried about how to execute on a project. But as a manager too, we also have that fine line where we also have to manage the resources. So all the people that are doing the things against the performance goals that my executives are telling me I have to hit. So we're in that liminal space, right? We're in that kind of that sandwich part of leadership where it can be really tricky, because if you have an individual contributor saying, hey, I've only got so many hours in the day to do X, but my executive saying I need Y done, how do you come together, right? How do you make this space work? And then even more, if you're an executive, so if you keep working your way up the path, then it's a whole different set of rules. Not only are you managing the org's priorities, right? And this is where I was talking about those external, those volatile things that are happening. That's when the federal level comes into play, the industry level comes into play. You're looking at regulations and how they're changing, but you still have to manage those people who are underneath you. And again, people are complex. Sometimes they do things that we think, why did you do that? And they might have a really good reason as to why they did it, but maybe we wouldn't have gotten to that same result the way that they did it. And so that's where managing internal and external expectations comes into play. And then last but not least, if you are at the very tippy top, everyone's looking to you for the vision and also that delivery of performance, or that ultimately that ROI. So that should look pretty normal to you, right? Like, this is something that a lot of times leadership development classes, they focus on these specific steps, putting one foot in front of the other. And then if you do these things, it should all turn out this way, right? But what does it actually feel like? So in many ways, it could feel like you are on an ocean and the waves are coming at you and the wind is changing direction and you might go overboard at any time. And you're ultimately maybe just hanging on. I'm a sailor, by the way, so like I love anything to do with sailing, so that's why this graphic's in here. But ultimately, this is what we usually don't coach to. This is unfortunately in leadership development, and I've been around leadership development now for almost 7 years. All the stuff that I've taught, all the stuff that I've been involved in, not only professionally but also with university, this stuff is usually the stuff that doesn't make it into the textbook. Is really just understanding that there's an emotional part of this. It's the human part. So why I wanted to talk about this with you all today is that there's actually a tactic you can use. There's actually a mindset you can develop called enterprise leadership mindset that will help you in this current state. And the reason is because it's actually very close to sailing. So when you get into a sailboat, you can prep all you want. You can have brand new sails, you can have washed the deck of the boat, you can be in your top gear, you can be ready to go. The minute you get on the water, the wind can shift, the waves can change. Maybe someone on your crew gets sick, and suddenly, if they're seasick, they can't function. If that happens in a sailboat, the best thing to do is look at the horizon, because a horizon is stabilizing. The horizon doesn't change. So what that means for us is that when we look to the left of our screen, a lot of times as managers and executives, we're usually looking down. We've always got our heads down because we're looking at who our teams are and what's actually happening. What I'm asking you to do is change that perspective, change that mindset, and actually start looking at the horizontal level. Instead of vertical, we're looking to look horizontal. So why? And this is why leadership matters from an enterprise mindset. It's the best practice of utilizing what's called a first team. And if you've never heard this term before, what it really means is that first teams are your peers and your allies driving shared priorities across your organization. It is not the people you manage. So if you are a people leader right now, if I say to you, hey, who's your first team? You might automatically think, oh, it's the team I manage. It's my coordinators, my specialists, my supervisors, whoever that is, right? It's actually, and we'll see this in a few slides, it's actually your same layer of people across the organization that if you are working as a first team, you're going to be able to move the needle faster because you all have a shared set of goals, most likely, as well as perspectives from your role in the organization. And this does require a mindset change. So this requires understanding what the strategic org objectives are at your layer in the organization, but it's also being willing to work more cross-functionally and knowing that if you change this, you're going to be able to actually get a little bit more done on the grand scheme of things. And this is why systems thinking comes into play, right? If we're working cross-functionally, if we're looking horizontally, we're seeing the system as a whole rather than just our slice of it. So it's going to be using a more holistic approach, which sustainability depends on, right? We know that we can't reduce emissions overall if we're only tackling one part of the scopes, right? We have to be looking at scopes 1, 2, and 3 to look at a holistic approach for that. But also it means that from a contribution and from an impact perspective, all of the spokes in the wheel, everyone's contributing equally to make sure that the impact is actually going to be realized. And if this sounds like it's transforming culture, it is. This is actually a transformation tool that we've used in workshops for a lot of different clients that I've helped with over the years. And it's really focusing on core purposes and making sure that no matter what you're doing, you're really talking about it as a core purpose. It's not necessarily a nice to have. It's not necessarily the right thing to do. A lot of times we might think in those terms, and that's okay. But when you're talking about it from a business perspective, the business exists to do business. So it's how can you make these values integrate in with what you're actually doing on the core purpose of every day or the core purpose of your team's roles, and make sure that you're prioritizing that time and also training them to be able to do that. So before we go into some visuals that are going to better explain this a bit, Jesse, I'm going to ask if you can launch the poll because I really want to understand who you all are today in attendance. And by me understanding that, I'll be able to customize this a little bit better for everybody. So Jesse, I might not be able to see it on my end. I just want to, if you can let me know if you've got it displayed and if people are good to go.
Let's see. I did launch it. It looks like I can share it. Can you see that?
Okay. Yeah.
Yep. Okay, great.
All right. So it looks like we've got mostly individual contributors as well as some, oh, we've got a wide array of everybody. Okay, well, great. I'm glad we have a wide swath. Okay, awesome. Thank you, Jesse. I appreciate it. So I'm going to go back to sharing. And that's great. All right. Well, I'm glad because hopefully something today that each of you here is going to resonate with you in your position. And we should be able to hopefully get that going right now. So again, what this graphic is going to do is just kind of say or visualize what I said before, which is when we think about who our first team is, it's really most of us go to immediately the people I lead. Or if I'm an employee, so if I'm at the entry level position or maybe I'm an individual contributor, I'm usually thinking like my team is okay, yeah, like my manager and my fellow peers. In a way, that's not wrong based on how we've traditionally coached leaders. This is not, if your brain immediately went to that, you're not wrong. The difference, however, is that when we start thinking about an enterprise leader mindset, it shifts and you have to start seeing again that horizontal line to say, hey, if I'm the sustainability manager and I really need to get emissions under control, my question to you would be, well, what's your relationship with your supply chain management? Are you talking to that team on a regular basis? Does that manager, maybe it's procurement or whatever the title is in the company, your peer, do they have the same goals you do? They probably don't. A lot of times what we find, especially in mid-level companies or even huge multinational companies, the business units or the departments are so good at doing what they do individually. But when you have to take a step back and take that 30,000-foot view, if the managers especially aren't aligned on common goals or don't understand how the full picture is illustrated of how to achieve something like, let's say you're trying to get a net zero result. Well, if everyone's doing their own thing and worrying only about their team, that's never going to happen. It's just the laws of physics, right? You can't force something to happen if you're not all going in the same direction. So think about this differently. It doesn't mean as a manager, by the way, that you're abandoning your team. So please don't take that as being the result of this. What I'm basically saying is start thinking more systematically of if my team has very specific goals of waste reduction, water, use reduction, whatever the sustainability goals are. Think about what does that look like in a holistic standpoint across the company? Who can you get as an ally that's at your same level to be able to start moving that needle? Because if you are able to engage them and they're able to activate their team underneath them to do that, well, then you're just going to be able to advance the possibility of getting that goal accomplished that much faster. And for executives too, this matters, as well as for individual contributors. So the same mindset can be applied at any level of the company. So if you're an executive, most likely your peer level is board of directors. And I spent a lot of time in my own career dealing directly with boards myself, and I also am a board participant in many different organizations. And I can say, it is evident when you can tell that the executive level and the board of directors do not have the same goals in mind, right? Or let's say there's someone on the board that's really pushing to take the board in a different direction, and maybe they're not sharing that same belief system with the executive. So it's really important, I would say, for any executive to make sure that they are actively engaged with their board to develop those relationships. Everything that I'm saying, it takes work, right? It is not, it's can be harder than it sounds. All these things, I get the realities of it. But at least if you can come to some common ground, it doesn't mean you have to be in full agreement. It just means that you're in alignment with people. If you take that approach and you can say, look, either we're not set up to do something effectively, or we can do this, but not that, it starts to just help with that transparency effect that sustainability truly depends on to make these things happen. And if you're an individual contributor, think of your own peer level, right? You guys can actually do a lot together, especially from a cross-functional perspective. And this is career building advice, meaning like if you can show how you've partnered cross-functionally with people at your own level to make things happen, that's a feather in your cap for your own professional development. That is great on resumes. That's great on LinkedIn. All those things that you're looking to do to advance your own career, it needs to show that you can do these things from a broader scope and that you have that systems thinking happening, not just for what you're individually responsible for, but also to how to make the team succeed. And if you directly engage with suppliers, if you're directly engaged with partners and vendors, I've done this approach with my partners and vendors all the time, where I think of them as an extension of my team. And I'm saying, hey, you're in this with me just as much as my team is. I need you here with me. And that can also look like how it shows up in your contracts with them, agreements, SOWs, anything that you're signing. Make it a part of it. Make it a part of your active discussion, and have their goals suddenly be rooted in your goals. All right. So how do we do this, right? So this all sounds really great, but how are we actually able to be starting to get this deployed in our day-to-day? It's actually quite easy. It, like anything, it just takes practice, and it just starts, being willing to change your mind. By you showing up here today, that's already a step in the right direction. So I do appreciate you taking the time to do that. But when we think about this in a process orientation, it's actually several steps. The first is really just to be willing to have that mindset change. And again, answering the question, excuse me, who is my first team? And again, it's that horizontal view. And then the second question to ask is, do we have a relationship? And if we do, is it good? Or does it need some improvement? Or even better, are you really tight? Are you already working with that person? And if you are, have a discussion about goals. Everyone has goals in a company, right? Everyone in their performance review has a goal they have to obtain or has to accomplish. Have a transparent conversation about it and say, look, I'm trying to achieve this. Are you trying to achieve something similar? If not, maybe you guys can come together and say, if we each do our part, then this goal will be accomplished. It just starts with asking questions. And the second piece of this, again, is that systems thinking, right? So if you don't have shared goals, what about the goals can come together to maybe have a net effect to achieve something bigger? This really comes down to accountability and or dependency. And the reason why I said and or is that not everything that can be held accountable necessarily has a dependency. And not everything that has a dependency a lot of times can be accountable. It's frustrating, but let's take that back for a moment. So think about like a recycling program, right? You know that waste is being produced every day, right? But if there's no accountability for who's controlling that, meaning like, is the dependency that the correct bins are set up in different areas? Is there correct waste removal practices happening? There's a dependency there where something has to happen before people can practice it. And if people aren't practicing it, you have to kind of go back and say, were they given the opportunity to succeed in the first place? It might be that no, it wasn't. And if you're how can you hold somebody accountable if that first step wasn't taken? So rather than pointing fingers or rather than saying, oh my gosh, this is awful, say more about, okay, well, how do we just transform the culture? How do we align on saying, look, we have a problem, here's how we can address it. And if you have an org that's willing to listen and maybe just say, okay, yes, we're going to try this. It could be a 30-day trial. It could be a 60-day trial. There has to be some sort of a dynamic that of inherently is your org culture ready to take this on? And what I just talked about are pretty basic things, right? Like those are pretty much bare bones in sustainability. But think about the really big goals you're trying to accomplish. Or think about maybe some of the supplier agreements that are coming down that you need to be able to react to. Think about just ways in which you can build that alignment, where that might look from a culture standpoint, and have transparent conversations up and down the ladder. Meaning it's not going to hurt you to have a transparent conversation to say, we're trying to do this, but this is not happening the way we want it to, but this would be the ideal state. That's a more positive conversation to start transforming culture rather than just saying, oh, we can't do it, or oh my God, that's impossible, or so-and-so is just so difficult to work with. I can't believe I'm going to have to try and do this. Changing that mindset to say, maybe we're not where we need to be, but here's how we could get there. It changes the tone. And that leads me to the next point, which is addressing bias. Now, I'm going to give a quick shout out here. This graphic is actually not mine. This is from a friend of mine. Matt is his name, and he heads up Focus Training, which is the training group here in Milwaukee, and they do outstanding work in professional development. He and I actually will be together in November at the conference delivering the workshop part of these topics. But one thing that he does a lot of extensive work on with other companies and his clients is really addressing bias. And enterprise leaders, if we're practicing it, we know that bias is going to occur in a systems approach. It's not that you can just avoid it or that you can somehow cure it or fix it. And it's because we're human, right? Humans, in our fight or flight for survival depends on bias for us to be able to react, right? If we think there's danger, if we think we're at risk somehow, like we have to be able to react to all the different signals we're getting from our environment to be able to function. But humans as a whole, we tend to focus on this inner circle. So if you look at the two different concentric circles, the first one, the one in the center, is the one we tend to usually have the most visceral reaction to. But sustainability is impacted by the outer circle because I'll pick on my own class, right? Political belief, that's something that we're actively discussing and how it transforms sustainability. Sustainability went through a huge advancement in the last 4 years of the last administration. And now obviously it's being pulled back in the current administration. And it has nothing to do with science, nothing to do with innovation. It's just political conditions. But I would argue there's probably also something to do with language and communication around that. So when I showed that earlier slide about the SBC defining value in business, nothing on that slide had anything that I would consider is a spicy sustainability term, meaning like we didn't call out carbon accounting, we didn't call out net zero. We just were saying, hey, we want to avoid risk in our business. We want to do better, essentially. So that right there, if you think about language and communication, that can help start to tackle bias. But it also has everything to do also with our role in the organization, like how much power we can leverage, and as well as our education. There are some things that obviously require education or advanced training to advance sustainability. And if as leaders, we're not giving our teams training or opportunity to advance those skills, well, and inherently, we're going to naturally have a bias then that keeps being prolonged because we're not giving them the tools to succeed. And there's also different types of bias too. So again, we're not going to spend too much time on this today because we're going to get more to this when we talk in November. But just for your own exploration of this, and if you're really curious about bias, it's actually a really fascinating topic to explore. The two different types of bias are conscious and unconscious. So some we just don't even know we're doing. Like, for example, affinity bias. We're all probably guilty of this, right? If you come to my family's house at Thanksgiving, oh my gosh, like there's definitely, factions have formed and different sides of the room have definitely divided. And it's more of that us versus them. No matter how much we love each other, a lot of times there's just the split. And with that also then comes confirmation bias, right? Support. This is a very human thing. We want to be around people who we naturally just know have our backs. right? Like if I say to my book club, we've been together for 20 years, I can say that I can send them a meme in a text if I'm having a crazy day, and I immediately will get hearts and likes and just some supporting messages for that day. And it's the pick me up we want, right? It's that reinforcement. But there's also attribution bias, and this is a huge part I think sustainability needs to kind of tackle and deal with. And what that means is that it's our behavior that we immediately think if someone does this in a sustainability standpoint, they're good or they're bad. This is directly coming into the stuff that I teach with my class. And there's also, with this attribution bias, we immediately also think right versus left or conservative versus liberal. There are plenty of areas where this is actually disproven all the time. If we really wanted to go deep on this, there's plenty of rules or legislation, different types of policies that have come out over the years that are completely bipartisan and that kind of overturn attribution bias. This also might show up in how we talk with suppliers, right? If we think we have a supplier that's just always doing the wrong thing, well, maybe they just don't know. But rather than us labeling them in their behavior, we have to kind of take a step back and say, did we set them up for success, or do they even understand what we're trying to do? Conformity bias is also norms. So that's why when we see in the 50 states, there are some states that are way farther ahead in sustainability than others. We can say California is one of those states. There's also halo and horn. This is basically the devil and the angel. So good versus bad. That has a lot to do with affinity bias. And then there's also just proximity bias. How frequently are we interacting? If we've got our ride or die friends that we know are always going to be with us, well, then we're more likely to want to engage with them and more likely to just shun or go away from people we don't know. So that's a very Cliff Notes version of the biases, but hopefully that gives you some food for thought as you think about your own ways that you show up every day. Also, think about your teams and your leaders. Like I said, we're human, we're complex. Not every day is the same. And so when we think about how we show up, depending on different stresses in life, these biases might come out in a myriad of different emotions. It might make us nervous. And especially like when we're thinking about change management is huge in sustainability. And bias will come out in different forms whenever we're asking for someone to change. And as sustainability professionals know, we are asking for change all the time, right? Because things are changing for us and we need our teams to be able to reflect that too and be able to do things differently. But that could make them suspicious of what we're asking them, defensive. So we've got our suit of armor. We kind of build up with bias over the years. Like we are coming in ready to go. We're armed. We're ready to fight. It also could be dismissive, right? So if we know there's something that could be done better, but let's say we've raised the issue and we're told not now or not a good time or, hey, this isn't within the budget, then we potentially might become hypercritical because we might think so-and-so's just not listening to me and I can't believe it. It's so obvious. Why can't we do this? And then the worst case might be that someone just goes out of their way to undermine whatever we're doing. So when we take a step back and we think about the human element and why this matters for leadership development, it really changes our scope of how we're thinking about our organization. And again, if we're thinking at that horizontal level, what departments might be sticky for us, right? Like if we maybe have problems in a certain area or we always seem to run into some barriers, think about this as might be what fueling some of that behavior to understand how we can think about the reactionary part of it and how we might be able to change that culture. And in the second webinar in October, we're going to be talking specifically about terminology and language and storytelling to gain that buy-in, because that's essentially what we're asking for, right? Anytime we go to somebody and say, I need something to change. I mean, I've been asking my husband for years to run the dishwasher and load it differently. And I even talk about it with him multiple times. And we've had very calm conversations. We've had not so calm conversations. But again, you're asking someone for change. And no matter what it is, it can either be smooth or it can actually create a lot of ripples and it can create a lot of things that come with it. So it's just a good way to do a self-check on your own before you show up to a meeting, or before you show up for a project that might have really big impact, and understand how it's going to create a ripple effect throughout the organization. All right, so here's an interesting little case study, and I thank Jesse for letting me include this because I know this is a kind of a complex graphic, but I think what this does really well is it gives a really holistic view of everything we kind of just talked about. Now, this is a graphic from a very well-known, huge multinational company, and this is their sustainability program. Like, this is what they have on their website. If you're interested, it's Raytheon Technologies. So they build missile defense systems, they build microwaves. They're a huge multinational company. And I used to work with them actually in my previous role. And when you look at this large of a sustainability strategy, there's so many things happening in this, right? So they not only have it broken down from an ESG perspective, so they have a people, planet, principles perspective, but they actually have a variety of different things called out, and we can see that around the graphic. But think about where the different teams might show up. And if you're the sustainability department, you're going to have to figure out how to build really good relationships across the entire organization. Because, like, let's pick on HR for a moment. If you are looking for people to come into the organization with a certain amount of skills to develop to activate and work on the goals that you have slated, or even if you just need to train up your own employees, well, you need HR's buy-in to do that. And you need to be able to talk to HR why this matters. Or think about ethics and compliance. Finance and legal teams deal with this every single day, but they deal with it from what they understand. And if they don't have sustainability training, they're not going to be thinking about it from your point of view. And then, our friends in IT and our friends in ops, right? Like, there's all sorts of things that are happening every single day that we need their help on. But if we're not communicating correctly, or we haven't built those bridges yet to know who in IT or who in operations or who in HR can help me do what I need to do, we're just going to continue to slow down, right? So that's where that enterprise leadership mindset really comes into play. So to kind of wrap some things up, there's one way you can do this that I've found over the years just helps, and it's focusing on a key mission ideal. So we know there's going to be competing priorities within different business units. That's just a given, right? That's just a day that ends in Y. And it usually translates to distraction, meaning that we know we have something we have to compete or complete, but it's going to compete with something they have to complete, right? They have their own set of priorities. And debate will occur, right? We just know it hopefully will be friendly debate, but we know that that's going to happen. But our goal is really to just strike balance. So that's compromise, that's collaboration. And a way to do it, when you think about the key mission ideal, the biggest thing to take away from it is prioritization and value. So if the key values or your key mission of your organization is to reduce cost and expense, well, that waste fits under that directly, right? Is that also then best for your customers? Yeah, because the cost is going to come down. The cost of doing business with them, them doing business with you is going to come down. And then if you do need leaders to come in and break a tie, talk about it in business value terms. It's not about necessarily doing the right thing. It's not necessarily about all the things that we know from a sustainability standpoint are at the heart of it, but how does it go back again to the key mission of the organization? How can you translate that into ROI? How can you translate that into the KPIs and the different OKRs that you guys are already performing against? And so in summary, because I want to make sure we leave some time for questions, again, it's a mindset shift. It's a change in our mindset, starting with us first, about who our first teams are, right? Who are the people I can collaborate with at my level that already know the pressures that come with my role, right? If I'm at a horizontal viewpoint, they're going to get it, right? They know they're kind of in the same ballpark that I am. But it also requires a systems thinking approach. So it's, again, reaching across the different teams to say, I need your help with this, or I need, hey, I've been having problems with this. What do you think about this problem? That in turn will naturally transform culture over time. It just needs that time, and it needs that willingness to align. It's not going to happen overnight, but over time, I promise you, it will come to light. And leaders, for those of you who are on the call that are responsible for teams underneath you, you gotta reserve some time for this to happen naturally, which I'm confident you will do. But just know that this is something that, with reinforcement, with habit becomes, practice becomes habit. It's the same type of rules. We have to be able to nurture that. But we also have to be acknowledging that biases not only impact our org culture, but it's dynamic and it's fluid. Bias shows up in different ways every day. Again, we're human. It's just part of who we are. But it also can be used to our advantage. It can be used to build empathy. It can be used to build great relationships, not only internally, but also think about externally, right? Who are your suppliers? Who is your stakeholder community? How are they maybe already coming in with bias? And how can you help make sure that that's working more seamlessly. And then again, at the end of the day, we're all supposed to do a certain goal, or we're supposed to perform to that certain goal. So it's the key mission ideal. I was in retail for a very long time, and at the end of the day, the whole point was: did you sell? Did you hit your mark? Did you hit your sales goal? That was all at the end of the day. You could have been 8 hours in with, and I was in e-commerce, so we were programming flash sales, we were changing prices with vendors, we were doing all this stuff. There's this flurry of activity, but at the end of the day, did we hit our mark? Right? It's the same principle here, and sometimes we're just going to have to look at striking that balance. We're going to have to prioritize what we can and we can't do, and again, we're going to just need to communicate that value. So I know that was a lot of information in a relatively short amount of time, but this is just one piece of the leadership development pie that we're going to be talking for the next couple of weeks. Jesse, I'm welcoming anyone to type into the chat if they've got questions, or they can just simply unmute. I know we have a smaller group today, but hopefully that was beneficial for everybody, and I'm happy to answer any questions that came to mind.
Yeah, I did just put something in the chat, just if you have questions or like current challenges, right? Share those so we can maybe work through them together. I just wanted to take a moment here, and like I appreciate so much of this because I feel like it's so much of the challenges that we hear on a day-to-day basis, right, are just with that integration piece, right? And like what you're speaking to here are just simple shifts and tweaks that we can all make as we approach the work with our teams, to help with that integration across the organization. So I just think it was great information. Thank you so much for sharing. So anybody have any questions, thoughts, comments, or challenges? Yeah, Caitlin, go ahead.
All
Feel
right,
free to
I'm
come
just
up mute.
gonna,
Yeah.
okay, cool.
Yep.
So hi, Erin, my name's Kaylin. I am the sustainability manager for a dairy cooperative here out of the state of Wisconsin. So I think one of the things that really drew me into kind of the concepts you were talking about was the concept of bias. And I think, frankly, it's one of the things I face on a daily basis in terms of kind of this interesting dynamic of we as an industry, and I should have been more specific, dairy cooperative, but we as a dairy industry have made a lot of commitments and recognize that we both impact as well as are impacted by a lot of different variations of sustainability topics. However, recognizing that sentiment for individuals, whether that be in our organization or in the industry, can contradict some of their societal norms of the communities that they're within, whether that be their rural communities or agriculture communities. And so I think kind of just what is your recommendation for starting to get bias training and awareness a little bit more profound in an organization? Just because, again, this is something as you were talking about it, I very much experience on a day-to-day basis, in that people in our organization, they recognize the call to action from our industry, but I think they have a hard time getting on board because of personal resistance, and again, just kind of the sentiment they may face within their own communities that they're a part of. And so just trying to bring to light what are opportunities for me as sustainability to partner with our leadership and development team to do some kind of bias training that doesn't have to be narrowly focused on sustainability, but just the concept of bias that I can selfishly then leverage in sustainability.
Yeah, and that's a fantastic question, and also a way to think about it. So typically when we do workshops on bias, a couple of things emerge. So the first is just fear. That a lot of times bias is oftentimes rooted in fear. If you look at a little group of kids playing, a lot of them don't have fear. Like, they're willing to try new things. They're excited. They want to learn. They're willing to change their mind. The older we get, the more that doesn't happen, right? We become sort of set in our ways. We've maybe tried something and gotten burned, right? Like, I mean, heck, I mean, I I look at like how my career has evolved. There's certain things I was just like, oh, okay, like that did not work. And maybe you just ultimately then become scared without even knowing that you're scared to try it again. So I think knowing that, like, as we age, that's just a natural part of the human development. Like, our brains just sort of naturally react that way. I think for your group especially, you are correct that ag in general, just agriculture in general, is a unique entity, because it's vital. It's something we can't do without, but it's also something that's very politically charged and has been traditionally for years. This isn't something that's like a new phenomenon. It's decades of this type of being. You grow into it. A lot of times it's families involved. There's all these different types of things that impact this industry that's a little bit different than others. I would say, I think for your own benefit, again, come back to the value piece of it. And if you're trying to address bias, it's hear them out of, is there other fears of because of cost, rising costs on things. Anytime that more money is being asked for to be either invested in or new equipment has to be purchased, a lot of these guys might be operating on shoestring budgets, right? We don't know. So I think just asking some uncovering questions to say, what is there a fear or something that's a barrier to them being willing to make the change? Some of it also is personal beliefs, like they might be fully ingrained, like you said, in their community. I That is my own family by definition. My parents, when I told them I was getting a degree in sustainability, they kind of had deers in the headlights looks. And I remember my mom asking me about one of my classes that I was taking, and she's like, "What are you learning about?" And I said, scopes 1, 2, and 3. And she was like, "Oh, okay." And then she pivoted and told me something about my aunt, right? So she didn't even want to expand on the topic. She just shut down. When I started talking with them about, hey, we're reducing waste, we're reducing cost, we're talking about people being healthier, that suddenly they had a ton of questions about, and suddenly they were very interested in what I was learning about. I see that also then materialize in my class that I'm teaching. So that's one of the things that we talk about from a geopolitical standpoint, is that relationships are at the heart of geopolitics. It's at the heart of what we do too from an industry perspective. I think unfortunately industries tend to forget that it's relationship building, that people want to do business with people they like, and people want to do business with people that they feel get them. So if you're willing to, I think, just talk about it in plain language, and if they seem hesitant, acknowledge it and just say, hey, it sounds like you've got some questions, or maybe we would need to think about that a little bit. How can I help you? Like, what would you like to know more about? It's just bringing the human element in. And suddenly then they feel that they suddenly have your support. Whereas maybe before they thought that you were trying to impose something on them, whether or not you weren't, the intent probably wasn't there. It's just that it's the receiving end of it is what matters. Everything that I just said is exactly what we're going to be talking about in the second webinar in October, because a lot of this is about storytelling. And there are wonderful stories from the agriculture community about where this has been successful, where it has, helped the farmer. It's helped, not only the community, but the farmer themselves. And I think learning where to pull those certain stories in, and then also being able to build the ROI around it, it ultimately shifts the conversation and then can help break down those barriers. We're never going to change somebody's inherent bias, but we will get them to think differently. So hopefully that helps. But yeah, if you're able to come back to the October webinar, we'll definitely go deeper on that.
Thank you so much, Erin. That definitely helps and gives me some good call to actions moving forward.
Yeah. Anything else, Jesse? Any other questions you saw? Or I can only see a little bit on my screen.
Yeah.
So apologies.
No, anybody else have any questions, comments?
Yeah, I can ask something here.
Yeah, please.
I'll move. Hi.
Hi, Kurt.
I'm Kurt Bamman, Sustainability Analyst at Uppost Natural Foods. And coming back to this position after a few years off, one of the, I've been going out and kind of doing a little bit of a listening tour with our managers and just kind of seeing, hey, I want to reintroduce myself, get to know folks I didn't know before, and then also just, see what was important to them, what feedback they have, where I can help. There is this, there's a feeling that, hey, when a sustainability person comes, it's like, what are they going to ask of me? What am I doing wrong? I'm already stretched thin on my time. What are they going to ask me to do more of? Combined with the fact that a lot of people, even in an organization where sustainability is pretty embedded in the culture, you kind of have this bifurcation of people that like are here a long time and are very knowledgeable and passionate, and also 50% turnover rate, where they're really, it's just a job for some people. And so I guess that's the issue I'm dealing with right now is, educating, inspiring, so that it's not just seen as, oh, another thing I have to do, but really connecting those. I know I'm trying to be, cognizant of that they have limited time and are stretched thin on staffing and hours, but like, I don't know if this is a very not a clearly defined question I'm even asking, but if you have any insight on that as far as how to kind of tackle that.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. That actually kind of dovetails with what we were just saying. So for the last 6.5 years, I was in a nonprofit for the quality industry. And if anyone has ever dealt with the quality industry, a lot of times they're viewed as like the department that says no. They're the
Right.
department that finds the problems. They suddenly, there's an issue. They're a lot, and that actually affects them very personally. A lot of quality managers that I've met, and quality directors I've met over the years, they're very hyper aware of that. And one guy I remember saying to me, he's like, "Well, I'm always, he's like, I come into the room and people go running, right?" So I think in many ways, sustainability is having what quality went through 30 years ago. Quality was at its height in the 80s. Quality is what many of us take for granted every day, right? It's why we have safe drinking water and all these other things, right? We think about like water quality, air quality, food quality, right? Food safety. Where I would say the quality industry learned how to get over being the naysayers or being the negative Nancy's in their organization is when they started coming to the table with value add. So they were saying, I know that, hey, I'm usually the guy that says no. Let me be a partner to you to help you avoid issues going forward. And it was more about like, how do we get ahead of this stuff before it becomes a problem? And I think it's my personal belief that sustainability is in the exact same it's our era of that, right? And quality turned around dramatically from that mindset shift when a lot of quality managers and quality supervisors started thinking themselves as a value add department and started thinking about, what are certain brands just known for today? It's the quality of their product. And that was a direct result of those managers saying, we're going to make value come from quality. Same thing with sustainability. Make value come from sustainability. Show up as a partner. And if you've got somebody who says, yeah, I don't have a lot of time, being like, I get it. I'm here to serve. I'm here to be your partner. What can I do to help, you succeed? It dynamically changes the conversation. And you probably will find that they end up giving you more time than they thought they would, right? Because it's just that they're starting to see you as being an ally to them. And it's the same thing with the enterprise leader mindset, right? It's like, if you've got another manager over in another department that you really need them to do better, have that mindset, have that approach. And it takes time, but over time, you'll probably have a better working relationship and a better result ultimately if you just invest that time. And ultimately, it saves time in the long run, right? If we're spending less time running around trying to correct errors, that gives us more time back then to actually do better. Like we can innovate, we can do other better things. So again, it's just acknowledging that we have to kind of make those small term and small time shifts where we can to then gain longer term benefit. So hopefully that helps. But I see the exact parallels between quality and sustainability, if that helps.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, great question.
I was just gonna add to that a little bit, and I think this is just more generally speaking. I think sometimes instead of approaching it as like, we always hear like the WIFM, what's in it for me? Like it's just taking the time to connect on a personal level, right? Like I learned this through my community organizing training, right? It's always like connect to the human first, find what's important to them, find what they value, and from there you can enter the conversation, right? So like kind of without approaching it as like, it's really approaching it with listening ears versus talking ear or talking mouth, right? Like just building that relationship and taking that time. It slows the progress down, which we get frustrated out as sustainability people, but it helps in the long run for all of us to achieve our goals, right? If we take the time necessary to just be like, hey, what's up? What's going on today? What's going on in your life? What do you care about? What's important to you, right? Like the rural farmers, what's important to your community? They might care about conservation or resiliency or legacy building, right? Like the shop floor employees are going to care more about like, their homework if they're in school or, what they're doing later tonight. Just finding that way to personally connect is kind of, I think easy and forgotten sometimes way to build that relationship than to be like, oh, okay, Kurt's not so bad. I guess I'll throw this in the trash for him today. Or in the recycling. I mean, not in the trash.
Yeah, 100%. And I was going to say, Jesse, that's actually a perfect segue because I know we're coming to time, but
Yeah.
that is exactly what we're going to be tackling in this second webinar. So on October 22nd, I'll be back. We're going to be talking about gaining buy-in through storytelling. So again, it's how do we change maybe the way that we talk a little bit about these problems to solve? And we're using it more for influence and decision-making purposes, right? We know the reporting has to happen. We know that there's stuff that has to get done every day, right? But again, as Jesse just mentioned, it's like taking it down to the human element and really just thinking about from a cultural significance, how do we move the needle? So I hope you all enjoyed the discussion. Thank you, Jesse. I appreciate the opportunity to speak.
Yeah, thanks so much for being here. I did just drop the link in the chat for the second one. If you haven't registered for that, you can do that. Erin, thank you so much for your wisdom and sharing your time with us. Thanks for showing up today, folks, and we'll see y'all soon. Thanks.
All right, awesome.